Hi, it's a pleasure to have you here. Subscribe to the channel and comment which city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. It was pouring rain the day I walked out of my father's memorial and straight into a boardroom filled with men twice my age, waiting to see if the daughter of a legend could keep his empire alive. My name is Emily Carter, I'm 30 years old, and the weight of a billion-dollar tech startup now rests on my shoulders. Not because I asked for it, but because I earned it. I had grown up beside the machines, the patents, the engineers. I knew every algorithm like I knew my own heartbeat. In that moment, in front of that table of calculating eyes, I didn't flinch. I took the seat at the head and said, "Let's begin." Since then, I've become the woman they don't underestimate. Brilliant, sharp, respected, and never outplayed. I met Michael Anderson on a rainy Thursday afternoon, during a high-stakes meeting in our Manhattan headquarters, where his software company was being considered for a major integration deal. He walked in with confidence, dressed simply but with presence, carrying only a laptop and a quiet determination in his eyes. I noticed him immediately, not because he tried to impress anyone but because he didn't. As the presentation began, I expected the usual buzzwords and empty charm, but instead he spoke with clarity, purpose, and deep technical insight. He wasn't there to charm the room. He was there to solve real problems. That caught my attention more than anything. When the meeting ended, I found myself wanting to talk to him again, not as CEO, but as Emily. What started as follow-up meetings and business calls slowly turned into longer conversations, small smiles exchanged over coffee, and moments that stretched longer than they should have. Michael had this calm energy that contrasted with the chaos of my world, a presence that made me feel like I could stop performing and just be. There was something disarming in the way he looked at me, like he saw past the titles, the suits, the billion-dollar pressure, and that unnerved me more than I expected. I caught myself thinking about him after hours, checking my phone for messages that had nothing to do with work. The connection wasn't planned and it wasn't convenient, but it was there, building slowly in the quiet moments between our agendas. I tried to push it aside, but something about him kept pulling me back. And for the first time in years, I didn't resist. Our first dinner outside work was supposed to be casual, a quick meal after a late meeting, but it ended with us walking for hours through the city, talking about life, music, childhood. I told him things I hadn't shared with anyone in years, and he listened without judgment or agenda. With Michael, I didn't feel like an heiress or a CEO. I just felt like a woman rediscovering what it meant to be seen. We started meeting more often, never officially calling them dates, but always knowing what they were. Each time the conversation grew deeper, the silence more comfortable, the distance between us smaller. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. It was quiet, honest, undeniable. And one night, when he reached for my hand across the table, I didn't pull away. I let it happen. What truly struck me was how completely uninterested he was in my money, in my power, in the empire behind my name. Most people in my life, partners, colleagues, even friends, treated me like a gateway, a connection, an opportunity. Michael never did. He never asked about the company unless it came up naturally, never made a single comment about my wealth. When I offered to pay for a trip or dinner, he politely declined, sometimes with a teasing smile, saying, "Let me do this one." He never competed with me, but he never leaned on me either. And that balance, that confidence without ego, is what broke through every defense I had. Michael didn't give me grand declarations or luxury gifts. He gave me attention, care, and effort in ways that were deeply personal. He remembered what kind of tea I drank when I was stressed and would bring it without asking. He planned surprise weekend getaways to quiet places where no one knew our names. He once fixed a glitch in my private office system without telling anyone, just so I wouldn't have to deal with the IT team. On my birthday, he wrote me a letter instead of buying something expensive, and I cried reading it alone in my room. Those little things meant more than any diamond ever could. It wasn't about the cost, it was about the intention. And with Michael, everything he did felt intentional. One night, While we were sitting on the porch of a lake house he'd rented for the weekend, I asked him why he always insisted on doing so much when he knew I could afford it all. He looked at me for a moment, then said softly, "Because this is how I love. Providing, taking care of the people I love, makes me feel whole." That sentence landed in a place I didn't know was still vulnerable. No one had ever spoken to me like that, not as someone to impress or conquer, but as someone worth protecting in quiet, consistent ways. In that moment, I realized he wasn't just a kind man. He was strong in a way that didn't need to prove itself, and I loved him even more for it. A year passed like a heartbeat, filled with slow mornings, passionate nights, honest conversations, and a partnership that only grew stronger under pressure. We balanced each other perfectly. He brought patience where I brought intensity, groundedness where I brought ambition. We fought sometimes, but never cruelly, always with a shared goal of understanding, not winning. And one evening, during a walk by the ocean near our weekend place, he stopped, held both my hands, and asked me to marry him. There was no ring yet, no staged moment, just truth and love in his eyes. I said yes without hesitation. It felt like the most natural decision I'd ever made. I had already introduced Michael to my mother and my aunt, two women who had been my anchors since my father passed. They adored him instantly, drawn to his warmth and the way he looked at me like I was his whole world. But when it came to his family, things were different. Every time I brought it up, he grew quiet, changed the subject, or said they were busy. He never said anything negative, but there was a tension in his voice whenever I asked. It felt like a door he didn't want me to open, and I didn't know why. At first, I gave him space, trusting that he'd let me in when he was ready. Weeks turned into months, and his answers stayed the same. Always vague, always avoiding. "When the time is right," he would say, or "it's complicated," as if that explained anything. I started to wonder what he was hiding. Was there a past relationship? A family rift? A secret child? The more I asked, the more uneasy he became. And yet, he was perfect in every other part of our lives. It made no sense. Everything about our relationship was built on honesty, except this. And that inconsistency started to eat at me, quietly, relentlessly. As our wedding approached, the silence around his family became impossible to ignore. I told him directly, gently but firmly, that I needed to meet his parents before we married. Not for approval, but for closure. I didn't want to step into marriage with any shadows between us. He hesitated, looked away, then finally nodded. "Okay," he said. "I'll talk to my mother." The way he said her name sent a chill through me, but I didn't press further. I thought maybe this was the beginning of something healing. I didn't know it was the start of something else entirely. He told me his mother had finally agreed to meet, but only her, and only at their family home in Greenwich, Connecticut. No restaurants, no public setting, just dinner at the house where he grew up. Something in his tone was off when he told me. He wasn't excited or relieved. He was nervous. I tried to focus on the positive. At least it was finally happening. We set the date for the following Saturday, and he made it clear we needed to be on time. She hated tardiness. I smiled, kissed him, told him it would be fine. But the night before the dinner, I barely slept. There was something in my chest, a quiet warning I couldn't shake. That morning, as I looked at my closet full of designer dresses and polished heels, I had a sudden thought. A test? Almost a game. What if I dressed as simply as I could? No labels, no makeup, no sign of who I was. Just Emily. I wanted to see how his mother would treat me without knowing my last name meant power. I knew it was a bit childish, but part of me needed to know the truth behind the polite masks. Michael raised an eyebrow when I told him, but then he smiled, almost sadly. "Do what you feel is right," he said. So I did. I chose my oldest pair of jeans, a soft gray sweater with a tear on the sleeve, and a worn-out coat that had survived college winters. I tied my hair back, wore no makeup, and left behind my heels for scuffed sneakers. As I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. But I also saw myself, stripped of everything but presence. I wasn't pretending to be someone else. I was showing up as someone real. I felt oddly calm, even as Michael glanced at me again, uncertain. "Let's go," I said, and we left the apartment in silence. The drive to Greenwich was quiet, the air inside the car heavier than usual, even with music playing low in the background. Michael kept glancing at me, as if trying to prepare me without words, but I didn't ask for reassurance, I wanted honesty. I could tell he was tense, his fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel, a habit he had when something bothered him. I reached out, touched his hand, and he squeezed mine without taking his eyes off the road. "They're going to love you," he said quietly. But the words didn't sound like a promise, they sounded like a hope, and that made me nervous in a way I couldn't explain. We pulled into the driveway of a large colonial-style house with perfectly trimmed hedges, white pillars, and silence that felt rehearsed. Everything about the property screamed legacy, discipline, and appearances. Michael parked the car, took a deep breath, and turned to me. "Are you ready?" he asked, but he didn't wait for an answer, he just stepped out and walked around to open my door. As I got out, I felt the weight of every unspoken expectation pressing down on me. I wasn't afraid. I was alert. And when we walked up the front steps, I held his hand a little tighter. The door opened after only one knock, as if she'd been watching through the window, waiting. A tall woman in her late 60s stood there, dressed in muted designer clothes, hair perfectly pinned, posture stiff as marble. Her eyes didn't meet mine right away. They scanned me from head to toe slowly, with a cold precision that felt like a blade. I smiled and extended my hand, but she didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't even blink. Instead, she looked at Michael and said, "This is her." No warmth, no welcome. Just judgment wrapped in pearls and perfume. She stepped aside slightly, but not enough to invite us in, just enough to continue staring. Her eyes narrowed on my shoes, then my coat, then the ends of my hair, as if she was searching for some explanation for what she saw. I stood still, refusing to shrink. The silence grew thick, uncomfortable, almost theatrical. Michael cleared his throat. "Mom, this is Emily," he said gently. She finally looked at my face, but there was no recognition, no shift. Just quiet, pointed disgust. And in that moment, I knew everything I needed to know. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was smooth and sharp at the same time, like ice breaking on glass. "This is the woman you want to marry?" she asked, eyes still locked on mine. She didn't even pretend to mask her disdain, didn't bother with pleasantries or fake warmth. Michael started to speak, but she raised a hand, silencing him with the authority of someone used to control. "I thought you had better taste," she added, voice low but cutting. My heart beat faster, not from fear, but from something darker, humiliation, anger, disbelief. I had expected coldness. I hadn't expected cruelty. She turned back toward the house, not to let us in, but to deliver the final blow. "I will never allow my son to marry some uneducated nobody," she said over her shoulder, her words landing like slaps. I opened my mouth to speak. Anything, a protest, a defense, a truth, but she didn't give me the chance. She reached for the door without a second glance. Michael stood frozen, his face pale with rage and shame. I felt like I had been stripped in the middle of a room I wasn't allowed to enter. And just like that, the door began to close. Before a single word could come out of my mouth, the heavy wooden door slammed shut with a finality that echoed in the quiet street. It wasn't just a rejection. It was a deliberate, brutal act of erasure. I stared at the door, stunned, breath caught in my chest, wondering if I had imagined it all. But the pain was too sharp to be fiction. Michael stood beside me, jaw clenched, fists tight at his sides. I could feel the shame radiating off him like heat. Neither of us moved for a long moment. Then he whispered, "Let's go." And we walked away from the house like strangers who had seen too much. As we walked back to the car, The silence between us felt heavier than the door that had just slammed in my face. Michael didn't say a word, and I didn't ask for one. I wasn't ready. My heart was pounding, not from sadness, but from a deep, cutting humiliation that made my throat burn. I sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window as he started the engine. He reached for my hand once, but I pulled it away, not in anger but in quiet pain. The ride home stretched longer than any distance we'd ever driven. We didn't listen to music. We didn't look at each other. We just breathed. The car moved, but time didn't. The trees passed in blurs, the lights flickered in silence, and I kept replaying her voice in my head. Those words, that tone, the way she looked at me like I was dirt beneath her feet. I hadn't expected love, but I had expected basic decency. What I got was rejection wrapped in polished cruelty. Michael's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, but he said nothing. And I didn't cry, not then. I sat still, holding the humiliation inside like a storm waiting for a place to land. We drove for over an hour without a single word. And still, that silence said everything. That night, after hours of walking in and out of the kitchen, pouring drinks he didn't touch, Michael finally sat beside me on the couch and told me what I already knew deep down. "They only care about money," he said, voice low, broken. "And status. And appearances." He looked at me with guilt in his eyes, not for what happened but for not warning me sooner. "I didn't want them to ruin what we have," he added. "But I should have been honest." His face was full of regret, but also shame. The kind that comes from being raised in a house that teaches you to hide the truth. I said nothing, just let his confession hang in the room like smoke. He went on, his voice trembling slightly, revealing pieces of a past he had tried to forget. "Every relationship I had before you ended because of them," he said. "They judged every woman, found flaws, pushed until something broke." He talked about the comments, the control, the emotional manipulation disguised as concern. "It wasn't about love," he said. "It was about image." His hands trembled slightly as he spoke, like he was reopening old wounds that had never fully healed. And for the first time I saw how deep their grip still was. He had escaped their house, but not their expectations. "I'm not like them," he said firmly, eyes locked on mine. "I love you for who you are, not for what you have." His voice didn't shake anymore. It was steady, certain, filled with conviction. "I didn't fall for your company or your name. I fell for you." And I believed him, not because of the words but because of the way he looked at me, like I was his home. In that moment I realized he had been carrying shame that wasn't his, guilt inherited from a family he never asked for. And by loving me he was choosing to break a cycle. I reached out finally and held his hand. We stayed up until almost dawn talking not just about what had happened but about what we wanted, who we were, what we feared. It wasn't romantic or poetic. It was raw, vulnerable, honest. We talked about children, legacy, the kind of marriage we wanted to build. I told him I didn't need perfection. I needed truth. He promised to never hide anything from me again, even if it was ugly. We sat wrapped in a blanket on the floor, tired but lighter, like two people who had survived a storm. And by morning the decision was made. We decided we didn't need anyone's approval to love each other, and we sure as hell didn't need permission to get married. The idea of a big wedding, filled with distant relatives and fake smiles, suddenly felt absurd. What mattered was us. What mattered was the life we were building, not the one others expected us to have. We chose to walk forward together, without their blessing, without their presence, and without apology. It wasn't defiance, it was freedom. And for the first time I felt like we were truly starting our own story. A month later we stood in front of a courthouse clerk, just the two of us, in clothes we picked out that morning, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. There were no flowers, no guests, no photographers. Just two people who had been through the fire and decided they still wanted forever. He slipped a simple gold band on my finger, and I did the same for him. We signed the papers, kissed, and laughed through the tears. It wasn't extravagant, but it was real. And I wouldn't have changed a single thing. We took a few photos on his phone, smiling, tear-streaked, completely in love, and posted one online with no caption. 2 rings, 2 hands, 2 hearts choosing each other against the odds. It was quiet, beautiful, and ours. We went out for lunch afterward, just the 2 of us again, and toasted with cheap champagne that tasted like victory. That night, we danced in our apartment to an old playlist we made during our first road trip. There were no witnesses, but we didn't need any. We had each other. The next morning, we woke up to a notification. One single comment on our wedding photo from his mother's account. What a disappointment! It read, short and sharp like a blade slipped between the ribs. Michael stared at the screen for a long time, unmoving. I waited for his reaction, but he just set the phone down and walked away. No anger, no shouting, just silence. The kind of silence that comes from wounds that are too deep to bleed. And I realized in that moment, she had lost her son. Not because of me, because of herself. After reading his mother's comment, Michael didn't need to say anything. We both knew what it meant. He blocked her number, removed her from all social media, and erased any digital door she could use to crawl back in. It wasn't an impulsive reaction. It was years of silent damage finally sealed with finality. I watched him close that chapter without rage, only resolve. She chose control over love, he said quietly. So I choose peace. And just like that, the ties were cut, not out of bitterness but out of survival. We never brought her up again. Not because we were pretending it didn't happen, but because it no longer deserved space in our home. There was no anger left, just clarity. We had tried and she had made her choice. So we moved forward, not carrying resentment but protecting peace. Our daily life became simpler, lighter, free of the weight of trying to please someone who never wanted to be pleased. Every laugh, every quiet moment between us felt more sacred. And with each passing day, her absence became irrelevant. Almost 8 months later, while Michael was out walking by the water with our dog, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I answered without thinking, and a cold, familiar voice echoed through the line. "Hello, Emily," she said, her tone suddenly warm, practiced, false. My body went still. She had found out. Not just who I was, but what I was. "I didn't know," she said. "I had no idea you were the Emily Carter." But she had known exactly who I was that night. What changed was the value of the name. And I knew that call wasn't about reconciliation. It was about opportunity. Over the next few days, she called Michael's phone more than 20 times, left long voicemails, even tried emailing him through work contacts. Her tone shifted with each message, first regretful, then proud, then desperate. "Please call me back. We need to talk. I'm so sorry." It wasn't remorse, it was panic. Panic that she had burned the bridge to something powerful. Panic that her prejudice had cost her proximity to influence. Michael didn't respond to a single one. And each silence was a louder message than anything he could say. One message stood out from the rest. In it, her voice was almost theatrical, carefully composed, as if she were reading from a script. "I'm so proud of you, son," she said. "And of your wonderful wife. What a beautiful couple you two make." Her words dripped with sweet poison, meant to sound loving but layered with manipulation. She wanted back in, not because she missed him, but because now, with me as his wife, he was suddenly worth something again. Michael listened once, then deleted it. "She never changed," he said. "She just changed her strategy." That night, Michael finally picked up the phone, not to invite a conversation, but to end one. His voice was calm, deliberate, without hesitation. "Now I see you only care about money," he told her. "But life isn't about that. It's about love. It's about who shows up when there's nothing to gain." She tried to interrupt, but he didn't let her. "You had your chance. I wanted a mother. You wanted a trophy. Then he ended the call, blocked the number again, and exhaled like someone who had finally told the truth to a ghost. After that call, she tried once more to reach us through extended family, but her efforts landed without weight. No more voicemails. No more emails. Eventually, the noise stopped completely. Her silence wasn't peace, it was surrender. And we didn't celebrate it, we just acknowledged it quietly. There was no satisfaction in cutting her out, only necessity. Over time, it felt as if she had never been part of the story at all. Her chapter closed itself and we never reopened it. Her absence became normal, like a door that had always been locked. Holidays came and went without her name being mentioned. Friends would sometimes ask about Michael's family, and he'd answer simply, "It's just us." And that was enough. We built new traditions, new holidays, new definitions of what family meant. There was no grief anymore. Only space where pain used to live. That chapter didn't end with drama. It ended with distance. And that, in itself, was the resolution we needed. 2 years later, we made a choice we never expected. We moved to a small coastal town in Maine, far from skyscrapers and headlines. The sea became our neighbor, the silence our ally. Our days slowed down. Morning walks by the harbor, lunches on the porch, evenings wrapped in warm blankets and soft music. There were no boardrooms, no deadlines, no disapproving glances. Just us rebuilding life on our terms. For the first time in years, I felt my breath return to its natural rhythm. And in that rhythm I found peace. I slowly stepped back from the company, not because I lost passion, but because I found something more important. I delegated major operations to a trusted team, kept only the strategic decisions for myself, and visited the office sparingly. The Emily who once lived by quarterly reports now lived by seasons and tides. I still cared deeply about the business, but it no longer defined me. What defined me now was breakfast with Michael, late-night talks by candlelight, and the way quiet could feel so full. I had traded urgency for presence, and I didn't miss the old pace. When Michael left his job, it wasn't a resignation, it was a transition. He joined me full-time, working remotely from home, blending his technical expertise with my strategic vision. We started small, consulting on mid-level projects, offering guidance to startups, testing ideas we'd always discussed over dinner. It didn't feel like work. It felt like building something together from the ground up. We balanced each other effortlessly. He grounded me when I was too ambitious, and I pushed him when he played it safe. It was partnership in every sense of the word. And for the first time, success felt personal. Working side by side revealed a new layer of our relationship, one built on creative trust and constant collaboration. We disagreed sometimes, but never harshly. Our debates sharpened our ideas. He'd code through the night while I shaped pitch decks by candlelight, each of us respecting the other's process. When one of us lost clarity, the other brought it back. Our home office became a haven of inspiration, laughter, and silent understanding. We were no longer just husband and wife. We were partners in vision, mission, and creation. And we loved the rhythm we had built. With our lives fully under our own control, we gave ourselves something we had rarely allowed before: time. Time for lazy mornings with coffee in bed, for long hikes without checking the clock, for cooking meals from scratch just because. We didn't need reservations at fancy restaurants. We had each other, a small garden, and stories that never ran out. Our phones stayed off more often. Our conversations deepened. We made space for joy in ways we never had before. And in that space, something new began to stir. We started checking off dream destinations from our list, not out of urgency, but because the world was finally within reach. Rome was first, where we wandered without maps and kissed beneath fading ruins. Then Tokyo, where we lost ourselves in neon streets and quiet temples. Buenos Aires followed, vibrant and warm, with midnight dances and cafe mornings. We didn't travel like tourists, we traveled like soulmates collecting moments. Each city left a mark, not just in memory, but in the bond we were deepening with each mile. And every time we returned home, we returned changed. Travel didn't test our relationship, it strengthened it. Being far from routine stripped everything down to the essentials, and what remained was unshakable. We laughed more, touched more, talked with new honesty that only unfamiliar streets could inspire. There were no arguments over directions or stress about plans. Just shared wonder, shared silence, shared life. We knew each other's rhythms, needs, fears, and dreams. We had been through rejection, judgment, and distance, but now we were living the reward. And that reward was love without effort, just presence. One quiet evening after returning from Florence, we sat on the porch watching the sun disappear behind the trees, and I said it out loud. I think I want to be a mom. Michael didn't flinch, he just smiled like he'd been waiting for me to say it first. Me too, he said, and that was it. No pressure, no timelines, just a shared readiness. We didn't tell anyone, didn't make announcements. We simply began to prepare, both mentally and emotionally, for the next chapter. We knew it wouldn't be easy, but we were ready for the beauty and chaos of it. 9 months later, on a rainy Tuesday morning, our son Noah was born, tiny, fierce, perfect. The moment I heard his first cry, something in me broke and rebuilt itself in the same breath. Michael held him with tears streaming down his face, whispering his name over and over like a prayer. Nothing in my life, not business, not love, not victory, had prepared me for the gravity of that moment. This wasn't about legacy or achievement. This was about soul. Noah wasn't just our son. He was our beginning all over again. Our home filled with a kind of joy that couldn't be measured by money, success, or milestones. Noah's smile was enough to reset an entire day. His laugh made everything else feel distant and unimportant. We took turns waking up at night, singing lullabies in the dark, taking endless photos of his every new expression. Work slowed down, priorities shifted, and we adjusted without hesitation. Every part of life became softer, warmer, fuller. We were no longer just two. We were a family, and that changed everything. We never told Noah about Michael's parents. Not out of shame, but because some people simply don't belong in the story. He grew up surrounded by love, not status, by kindness, not conditions. We decided early on that we wouldn't let toxicity sneak in through any cracks, not even in name. Our silence about that part of the past wasn't denial, it was protection. We weren't hiding the truth. We were choosing which truths deserved a place at our table. And they didn't. Life settled into a rhythm that felt like peace. Early mornings with pancakes, work-from-home days filled with laughter and shared goals, evening walks by the water with Noah tucked into his stroller. There were no surprises, no scandals, no ghosts. Just consistency, love, and the quiet joy of a life we had built from courage and choice. We kept our circles small, our routines sacred, our values firm. There was nothing extravagant about our days, but they were everything to us. Because peace, we'd learned, was the ultimate luxury. Even as our lives became quieter, the company I had inherited and transformed continued to grow steadily. I wasn't in the boardroom every day, but my vision still guided the long-term strategy, and I made sure the right people were in charge. I showed up when it mattered, signed off on major deals, and protected the culture I had built from within. But the pressure was no longer personal, it was professional. My identity was no longer tied to every stock shift or press release. I had learned to lead without sacrificing myself, and that shift changed everything. Every now and then, I'd fly to New York for a big meeting, dressed in silence and clarity rather than power suits. I didn't crave the city like before, but it didn't intimidate me either. It was just another piece of my life, no longer the center. I'd land, attend what I needed to, and be back on a plane the next morning, always returning to Michael and Noah. The view from the top was still familiar, but it didn't thrill me like it used to. My home in Maine was where the real victories waited, and every time I walked through the front door, I knew where I truly belonged. Our friends often told us we were the couple everyone looked up to, not because we were perfect, but because we were honest. We never pretended to be something we weren't. We never played roles for the sake of appearances. When we disagreed, we talked. When we were tired, we said it. When we needed space, we gave it without fear. Love wasn't a performance. It was a daily practice of presence, patience, and grace. People around us saw that and felt it. And without meaning to, we had become a quiet example of what real partnership looked like. Michael eventually started a side project, something small and creative, a tool to help freelancers manage contracts more easily. What began as a simple coding exercise in our basement slowly turned into something bigger, and together we turned it into a secondary income stream. It wasn't about the money, it was about the joy of building something again on our own terms. We worked side by side like we had before, late nights filled with coffee and quiet determination. Watching him light up with each breakthrough reminded me of the man I first fell in love with, and I realized we were still becoming. Living far from the noise, the expectations, and the judgment gave us a serenity that felt earned. We no longer needed to defend who we were or explain what we had chosen. There were no masks to wear, no roles to play, just a life stripped of unnecessary layers. The ocean became our anchor, and the stillness became our rhythm. Every quiet morning felt like a reward for every storm we had survived. Peace wasn't given to us, we carved it out ourselves, and that made it unshakable. Years passed and our love deepened. Not in dramatic gestures, but in the way we moved through life together. He knew when I needed space before I even asked. I could read his silences like second language. Our intimacy was no longer just physical. It was woven into how we raised our son, how we held hands during long walks, how we looked at each other across the dinner table. We didn't chase excitement, we nurtured connection. We had become the kind of couple I once thought only existed in stories, but we had written our own. Sometimes during quiet nights on the porch, we'd look back, not out of nostalgia but reflection. And never, not once, did either of us say we wished things had gone differently. Cutting ties with Michael's family, choosing a quiet wedding, moving away from the city. Every bold decision had led us here. To joy, to freedom, to a love that didn't need approval to be real. We had taken the harder road, yes, but it had given us a life without lies. And in that truth we found everything. We had learned something most people spend a lifetime trying to understand, that real wealth has nothing to do with money. It's in the way someone holds your hand when the world goes dark. It's in the softness of a child's breath on your shoulder. It's in the choice to love someone completely, especially when it's inconvenient. Success is measured in laughter at the dinner table, in peace at the end of the day, in knowing you're loved as you are. That's what we taught Noah. And that's what we built our lives upon. Noah grew up surrounded by love that didn't demand perfection, only presence. He never knew what it meant to feel judged, dismissed, or unseen. We raised him with honesty, softness, and structure, giving him roots and wings. Our home was full of music, books, sunlight, and slow dinners that lasted long after dessert. There were rules but never fear, expectations but never pressure. And through it all he thrived, not because we were perfect parents, but because we loved him out loud every single day. We didn't have dozens of friends, but the few we had were chosen, trusted, and deeply loved. Our circle was filled with people who had walked through life with their eyes open, who didn't care about titles, wealth, or headlines. We hosted quiet dinners, small celebrations, and laughed until our sides hurt with the kind of friends who became family. We showed up for each other in big and small ways. There was no pretense, no competition, just a shared understanding that this love, connection, peace was the real success story. And we were living it every day. As Noah grew, so did our sense of purpose. We began to talk about giving back, about creating something that could outlive us, something that wasn't just about profit. That's when we decided to start a foundation to support young entrepreneurs from underprivileged backgrounds, especially women. We knew how hard it was to be overlooked, underestimated, dismissed. I wanted to use my experience to guide others. Michael wanted to teach, to build tools that made success more accessible. It wasn't charity, it was responsibility. And it gave our story a wider meaning. There were moments, rare and quiet, when I thought of my father, not with sadness but with deep gratitude. I knew he would be proud. I hadn't just kept his company alive. I had transformed it, and more importantly, I had transformed myself. I had become someone who led without losing her soul, who built without stepping on anyone, who loved without fear. He had left me an empire, but I had created a life, a real one that wasn't measured in numbers but in joy, peace, and love. Ours wasn't a fairy tale, it was better. It was real. We faced judgment, rejection, and disappointment, but we chose each other every time. We didn't run from pain, we walked through it hand in hand and came out stronger. There were no fireworks, no grand finales, just years of choosing love over pride, truth over image, peace over perfection. We had built a home where we could breathe, a life where we could rest, and a love that nothing, no name, no insult, no storm could shake. Now, years later, I sit at the edge of our porch, watching Noah play in the grass while Michael reads nearby, and I realize, I need nothing else. I have everything I once chased in silence, only now it speaks to me in laughter and peace. We are far from the world we left behind, but closer than ever to what matters. There are no cameras, no interviews, no applause. Just a life fully lived, a love fully shared, and a family fully chosen. And that is enough. The foundation we built started small but grew into something powerful. We mentored dozens of young founders, helped launch businesses that changed lives, and watched dreams unfold. Every success felt personal, like we were rewriting part of our own story through theirs. Michael led tech workshops in schools. I hosted leadership retreats for young women. We didn't need to be public about it. The work spoke for itself. And with every life we touched, our purpose became clearer. Legacy wasn't what we left behind. It was what we gave while we were here. Noah grew up surrounded by people who loved him fiercely, not because of what he might become, but for exactly who he was. He was kind, curious, and wise beyond his years, with a heart that always leaned toward justice. We taught him to value truth, to stand up for others, to never let status define worth. He didn't need to unlearn anything. He had been raised in truth, and watching him grow was like watching a new chapter being written, one without the scars we had carried. He was our clean slate, our greatest creation. Sometimes I wrote letters I never mailed, to Michael's mother, to people from my past, even to my younger self. Not to open wounds, but to close them gently. Writing became my way of releasing old echoes, of letting go without needing answers. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need explanations. I just needed to say the things I had carried quietly for too long. And by putting them into words, I gave them form. And then I gave them freedom. The victories we celebrated most weren't in headlines, they were in moments no one saw. The day Noah told us he wanted to build something of his own. The evening Michael and I watched the sun set in complete silence, just breathing the same rhythm. The night I finally slept 8 full hours without waking up to urgency. These weren't dramatic, but they were everything. Because real joy, we had learned, doesn't shout. It whispers. And when it does, you listen. Years from now, when the house is quieter and the days stretch longer, I know it'll still be Michael and me, sitting on this porch wrapped in a blanket, sharing memories that no one else knows. We won't need many words. Just a glance, a smile, the silence of a love that never needed translation. Our story won't be written in books or carved in stone, but it will live in Noah's values, in the people we helped, in every choice we made with our hearts wide open. It will live in us,